Well, we've got some really, really good news with respect to the Wu flu coming out today, and that is that chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine, which are the two anti-malarial drugs that people have been or hoping for the last few weeks, might be of some use in treating the symptoms of this virus. Now, this is good, if true, and I'll get to that part later on what the chances of this actually are. But if true, this is very positive for two reasons. Primarily, it's that it's good that we actually have some way of treating this other than putting somebody on a ventilator and giving them morphine so that they don't feel so much pain in their lungs as they're dying. That's one good thing. So hopefully that means that the death rate for this will come substantially down, and that maybe we could get to the point to where this really is just the flu, because of course as of now the meme "it's just the flu, bro" is long dead, and 99% of people, or I shouldn't say 99. That we'll never get to 99, but let's just say 70% of people understand that this is a very bad virus that you don't want to get, even if you are not, one of these people in a high-risk group, you still have the risk that you could die from this. You still have the risk that this, even if you don't die, even if you don't have to go to the hospital, that this is a really, really crappy 2 weeks of your life or so that you would spend dealing with this infection. So that obviously, very big win if we could do that, if we could get to the point to where, there is a way to treat this. Now, with that said, there is another thing that I think not a lot of people are thinking about, and that is that if we get to a point to where this is not that serious of a virus for society, meaning that everyone who's walking around out there and it doesn't have immunity to this and is potentially an asymptomatic carrier, if we get to the point to where the threat of getting infected with the virus isn't that significant to your life, well then the threat posed by those asymptomatic carriers and by people who are symptomatic, walking around, drops substantially. And so from an aspect of civil society, this is a very good thing, because right now, not only are people afraid of, talking to other people potentially, not only is this social distancing policy having a significant effect on our economy that will lead to record unemployment, worse than the Great Depression based on the estimates from the Fed, and I might get to that later, I don't know. But something that not a lot of people are thinking about is that folks walking around outside, especially if they're in one of these high-risk groups, sees people who are not, visibly taking the same precautions as them to be a threat to them and in a way an enemy. And so let's say, for example, that this chloroquine stuff doesn't work, that there is no effective treatment ever devised to treat this virus and the disease. Well, then our only hope is to hold out and wait for some kind of a vaccine. And so if this virus is just raging through our society, for this whole time, over the many, many months, potentially a year, or longer that it would take to make a vaccine, by that point people are going to be very scared. And so what is going to be the inevitable result of that? Well, vaccination is probably going to be mandatory. It's going to be imposed by the state. And everyone, whether they want to or not, is going to have to line up and get a shot in their arm. Now, there is a minority of people in this country who have been, expecting and worrying that something like this would happen for many, many years. And they are people who are very suspicious of vaccines. Now, it's easy to make fun of anti-vaxxers and things and call them crazy, but they do exist. They have their views. And so we could end up at a point to where there is a very big clash between this group of people and the rest of society who is siding with the state and wanting to, force them to be injected, with these vaccines, which so far the government in the United States doesn't force people to get vaccines. I don't think they even force people in most states to give their children vaccines. But given the level of fear that exists in society right now, I think it's a guarantee at this point that if a vaccine is discovered or invented during the time that we're at the height of this crisis and the virus is seen as an existential threat to the vast majority of the American population, people are going to support a mandate that everyone be vaccinated. And that, of course, would set a very bad precedent. It's something that even I, as someone who's not an anti-vaxxer, would be concerned about. And that is, a precedent that the government can forcibly inject you with some kind of substance that you do not approve of. Because we already have the precedent that the government can stop you from injecting yourself with some kind of substance, namely heroin or doing any other kind of drugs. They're saying you can't ingest these chemicals, if we say you can't. But then on the other hand, now, if this were to happen, the government would be permitted also then to tell you what you do have to put in your body. So that would be, total control of what you're taking in and what you're having to ingest into your body. And so that would be very concerning to me. So I see this treatment, the development of perhaps new drugs that could treat the disease that is caused by the virus, as a hedge against this risk of government-mandated vaccinations. I mean, people have made, political cartoons of Americans being forced to line up, at the Walmart FEMA camps, and buy their Walmart products, on the way in, or on the way out, and on the way in, they're forced to be vaccinated by the FEMA guys. Well, that's not so crazy now. Not in this kind of a situation, and that's just going to cause all sorts of problems with people, because even people who are not anti-vaxxers are going to have a problem with this sort of compulsion. But there will be a critical mass of people who support it, and will be able to ram it through. So that will cause, not necessarily violent social unrest just from that in and of itself, but it's a way of poisoning the well, so to speak. Okay, it's just one more bad thing that American society would have going against it, because there's a lot of things tearing apart the American people. But let's leave that aside, because if there is a viable treatment for this, it takes that possibility off the table. There's no need to mandate the vaccine at that point, because like the regular flu, this won't be such an existential crisis. It will not be such an existential threat, and therefore it will not warrant such extreme measures. So like I said, there's a glimmer of hope here. Now, it's not the brightest, glimmer in the world, because the FDA, and it's not like they just approved this drug and said, hey, anybody who wants to take this drug is now allowed to take it. Okay, just go to the pharmacy, buy it, and you can put whatever you want, ingest it into your body. If you're about to die, your doctor can give you this, and you'll be okay. Well, actually, that last part is actually true, but the rest of it isn't. Okay, because what the FDA has done is essentially created a bit of a bureaucratic exemption for people who are pretty much on their deathbed and may not be able to be saved anyway. They are allowing the doctors then to prescribe these people this medication. If they can't get in on a clinical trial, which of course everyone's going to sign up for the clinical trial. That's what you always do if you're dying. You want whatever the experimental drug is, because you don't care if it has bad side effects if you're going to die anyway. So while the FDA is allowing some people to get this drug, it's going to be a small minority of the people who are actually infected with this. We're not going to be able to see how this treats a normal person, because they're not approving that. You still have to go through the FDA approval and get that put on your label, because when it comes to drugs, the FDA approves them for a very specific use. It doesn't just say, hey, you can use this drug. It's not poison, because, well, in some cases, drugs are poison. So all this stuff's very strictly controlled by the FDA. So we're not going to know for a long time if this can actually, save a lot of people right now. Let's say this drug is not that strong yet, or not that powerful, or not powerful enough to treat somebody who's already almost dead. Well, perhaps this drug is only good at helping you a little bit. It helps you on the margins fight off this virus. So, like, let's say if you catch it early and you start taking this drug, that it could help your infection. It could help ward off your infection before it really gets going. It can help stop the momentum of the virus in your body, but perhaps it doesn't actually, just eradicate it once it's already, sunk its teeth into you. Because a lot of the reports we've been hearing about are doctors who have just sort of been taking this thing unauthorized just because they have access to it, and using it as a prophylactic, meaning as a preventative kind of thing. There are similar drugs, I believe, that are actually approved for use with, for warding off HIV. It's not a cure for HIV, but it's the kind of thing that, hey, if you take this drug, you'll be less likely to get HIV, I believe is how it works. And so maybe giving this chloroquine to people who are on their deathbed isn't going to do anything, and that it's best used if everyone takes it as a preventative thing, so that they don't end up getting sick. But of course, we're not going to know that based on what the FDA has just done. It might be the case that, like I said, this drug can't help people who are almost dead and they die anyway, and then the FDA is going to say, well, this thing's useless, so nobody's allowed to use it now. At least not without going through a very long process of trials with the FDA, while this whole pandemic is raging. Because remember, the FDA's job is not to keep people safe or anything like that. The FDA is all about control, and it's all about money. The FDA exists to erect high fixed costs to producing any drug, for the market, so that only the handful of very, very large pharmaceutical companies that can afford to go through the FDA approval process, are actually able to market drugs. You don't want random scientists coming up with drugs and then saying, hey, I can produce this in my garage and cure people's illnesses, being able to do that, because that would be way too consumer friendly. That's not how I'm not going to get into political philosophy, but I've talked about it on the channel before, about how the U.S. system is not it's not consumer centric. It's very much producer centric. But the good part of that is that the producers of this chloroquine drug, of course, are some of the big pharmaceutical companies. So you could say they have a great incentive to try and grease the skids at the FDA, and get this through as quick as possible. I don't know, but I'm remaining cautiously optimistic on this front. Overall, I'm still quite pessimistic, mainly because of the economic impacts, but I won't get into those again today. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.